Welcome back to AXA Insights. And can you believe it? We're on to our next series in our podcasts. And this one is really focusing in on the role of the educational coach. Now, we are delighted to welcome all the way from the UK, Harry Hastings. Welcome, Harry.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. I would like to first begin by acknowledging the traditional owners from the lands and the waterways from which I am meeting today. I am working, living and learning on the Whadjuk Noongar land here in Perth in Western Australia. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and for their continued guidance, knowledge and support to the education of all Australians and beyond. A little bit of an introduction to our guest here today, and that is that Harry Hastings, who is a well-loved and renowned teacher from the UK. He is an outstanding teacher and has a few celebrity students who continue to credit him for their passion for education. Whilst I was not lucky enough to work alongside him, I arrived at the Dragon School in Oxford just after he'd left to take up a deputy head position. Now, even then, he was spoken about with some legendary status and was clearly loved and very much missed by the team. He moved to become a headmaster of Ardingly College Prep School and has worked out that he served 99 terms of education, which is quite a mean feat. Now he's moved on to coaching and is a level 7 coach in education and has set up his own consultancy company, The Sherpa, which looks to support schools, educators and those in the profession. So welcome, Harry. How are you today?
Thank you very much. Very good. No, I was sort of hoping I was slight sort of imposter there thinking, do I recognise all those lovely things they're saying about me? Anyway, that's very delightful of you to say all that, Anna. And yeah, it was a shame we didn't work alongside each other.
I know.
It's such a wonderful school. Wonderful school, wonderful place, wonderful people, you know, as I'm sure we'll get into during some of the questions today.
And that's such a lovely thing as well, I think, when you make that, Harry, is that, you know, whilst you didn't work together, I think we worked in a school that had such a good culture that those people are lifelong professional friends. And so also, I'm always quite an advocate for the network that you build in education. I think that's overlooked hugely. And being able to, even though you say we weren't in a working space together, knowing that we could connect because we had so much in common and we had that ability to connect through other colleagues. So I think that's really important. And we'll probably touch on bits of that today because I know that in your role now, that networking is even more important and going beyond that school environment. But let's look at the first question because really when we talk about 99 terms, that is quite impressive. Now, you were a headmaster. We call them principals over here in Australia. And I'm just thinking, if you look back over your career so far, what have been some of those lovely highlights about the journey?
Wow, I mean, where do you begin? And you asked, I knew you'd ask a question like this, and I'd have to go straight in it. I mean, what was lovely about your introduction? You were talking about the land and the people that you were working alongside, and people who come before you, and the work you're doing now, and the people who come after you. That's the real belonging idea, isn't it? That Owen Eastwood brings out in his wonderful book Belonging, and I'm a big sort of advocate of him and all his great work. And it is that, you know, we're really lucky to be where we are. We've inherited lots of tradition, the people who've come before us, and we're just doing the work. You know, it's our moment in the sun and all that kind of stuff. But we're looking. If I look back to all the wonderful people I work with and all the you know, whether it's pupils or staff or parents, I think I've always been a real believer in working with the community and working alongside them, and it's great relationships, and it's all about having fun, and it's all about learning. And I think I was sort of thinking probably I mean, there's so many great moments. 99 terms is a long time, you know, and obviously it wasn't always golden. It wasn't always incredible. And but also you know, it is just one moment, and sometimes maybe we take it all not a little bit too seriously, but actually it's just we try and enjoy as much as we can. I think, and I say that often to my guys, you know, it's just enough, and that is enough. You've done enough. But I look back when I was a gap year student, aged 18. I taught, and I still can't believe this, I taught 18 lessons as a gap year student. I know.
Wow. Well, they must have had a lot of
and
trust in you there, Harry.
and
They
well,
must
I
have
think
seen
that's
the
it.
greatness.
But with no qualifications, I was teaching history, I was teaching geography, verbal reasoning, and all this stuff to these poor children. Who is this guy? Anyway, great, wonderfully sort of fun. But how
Yeah.
times have changed. You couldn't do that now. I was
No.
also only being paid £65 a week, which I think is just genius. I remember that really well.
Yes.
So there's
I was
that.
gonna say.
That was one. There was Dragon School. Obviously, you're sort of
Yeah.
well versed with, but I loved Dragon for so many reasons. All the schools I've worked in 7 schools, but the Dragon was quite extraordinary. So good at the big events.
Yes.
And we had 2.5 days of sports day.
I know.
The plays. I remember there was an incredible guy called Ian Murchie we all knew and loved and worked alongside. I mean, classics of Robin Williams, Dead Poets legend. I mean, just incredible man. Yeah. And I remember one term I did Lord of the Flies as a year 7 and 8 play, and he was doing Oliver. I mean, how can you do that with this? He had a cast of 100 or whatever it is. Lord of the Flies not as big, but just the big things. But perhaps the greatest thing that the school did, and in terms of just relationships and fun and not taking ourselves too seriously, was the Dragon Sing song.
Yeah.
And just that, I mean,
yes,
silly sketches, staff not taking themselves seriously,
no,
and not being too pompous, and just being silly with the with the borders. And it was just a wonderful occasion of just staff showing off. I suppose that's what it was, and I was quite good at that. At the showing off. I don't know how good I was actually performing, but that was a great thing. And then I think I was just thinking, the last thing, a real wonderful memory was at Ardingly College, where I was head for 7 years, just over 7 years. We introduced the program called Shaping My World, which is a character education program based on 4 values that are very important to me now, as they were then, based on generous, adventurous, ingenious, and curious. So it's all about the us's, because we're all together as a community and all that. But we launched this and we took 2 weeks off the timetable to launch it, and the staff really bought in, the pupils really bought in, the parents really bought in. But perhaps the real highlight of that whole thing was we took year 8 to London for a day, and we not made them, it was that they loved it, but they sort of broke up into little groups of 6, and they had to go on an adventure around the London Underground from Victoria to Covent Garden via 6 or 7 different other places. And it involved them being generous, adventurous, and genius, all that sort of stuff. And they just loved it. And I stood in where did I stand? I stood in at Westminster in Parliament Square as all these groups were coming running in, signing off, and then going to the next venue. And they loved it. And they had to work their way around the underground, and it was just so summing up your question would be, it's just about the community, the relationships. I mean, I coach 4 ex-Dragons who are now in their 30s.
Yes.
And that's a lovely thing to do, so these are guys, we've connected on LinkedIn, and they're not in education. None of those guys are in education. And it's just a joy to now be working alongside them. One of them still rings me up and says, "Hi, sir." You're 35.
I know. Well, that's it, isn't it? I think you just sort of touched on a few things which I always value as so important, and it's definitely that culture. But I think if we look back at our times when we went at the Dragon, it was there was such a large staff who were also competitive in their own right, and they were all in that sort of space and creative and that kind of thing. You summed up with about Ian Murchie. That was those kind of people were there, but they were also the people who'd been there a long time and had the experience, and it was just lovely. And I remember talking to someone the other day, and we can get so caught up in educational pedagogy that we're all going to go down the same path as a school. And unfortunately, when we do that, we take away some of those beautiful nuances of character and personality. And that's what I think I took away from the Dragon, was that you had that lovely relationship because you were really celebrated for your qualities. So that had that flow on effect to those students, because as a cohesive team, students saw that beautiful interaction that we had. And I think that's really important, because when as you're saying, as you think about that whole community, it becomes, and it's probably more highlighted when you're in a boarding type community, because it really is night and day. But I think that other thing you mentioned was about parents, and that was lovely because we forget how important they all are and that holistic approach to education, which is vital, really. So yeah, that was a lovely thing, and it was like those nice 5 minutes to sort of throw myself back to where we were. If we look at things now, there's been this significant rise in the role of the educational coach, or just the educational coach in general. A kind of new, I mean, they've been around for a long time, but that kind of some elements of commercialism with things. But we have for many years seen the role of coach in, say, sport or as life coaches, but this is a very much a more targeted approach to education. And I often think, from my point of view, we see people out there who are setting up businesses and say they're educational coaches, but you have to do quite a deep dive to find out how they qualify for that role and what they're saying. Now, what I'm really interested in is over in the UK, you go through some quite rigorous and intensive programs to earn the accreditation of coach. Can you tell us a bit more about that process and kind of the value of working alongside those who are probably in a similar career stage in their lives?
Yeah, no, nice question. And it's when I did my qualification, that was back in 2021 with a wonderful man called Charlie Warshawski and his group Love Your Coaching. And there were 8 of us. We were funded by the IAPS, the Independent Association of Prep Schools, and it's a great plan. It was a great plan of them to bring this in, and it was basically the 8 of us all online, and we had about 50 coaching. We had 50 hours of being taught of what to do over a number of weeks, and it was a while ago. I can't quite remember it. And then we had to do 20 hours of coaching one-to-one, which was all assessed as well. And then we had to do a dissertation of about 10,000 words. I think it was 10,000. And can't have been, I think it certainly wasn't 20,000, but it wasn't 5,000. Because I got quite competitive, and me and this other guy, he said that he'd done 10,053, and I think I did 10,054. just because we did like very silly. Anyway, but it had to be. It was very thorough. Things were really assessed, and we were vivaed as well. It was a really thorough, interesting and exciting process. But I also look at how green I was when I first finished that. And then we had to coach. We had to coach 2 heads in our first year and 3 heads in our second year to essentially that was what the deal was with our IAPS association. And it made sense. So we then coached new heads in their new post. We were new coaches and we were coaching new heads. And it was a very valuable process. And I really enjoyed it. I worked alongside 2 great guys in the first year, and then 3 in the second. One I'm still doing some work with her. Actually, we've just continued it because it's really nice to do it. And so that's the basis of how the accreditation happens. And then the why. I mean, I think it was all, coaching was really new to me back at that time. And I say how green I was. Gosh, how green I was at the very start of the whole process. I mean, Charlie actually referred to me as chalk and cheese. And I've now got 200 hours of experience rather than 20 hours of experience. But I think it's so valuable because it really focuses. I know there's probably going to be more questions about what we can do within a coaching session and all that, but the why, I think it just gives you a really an understanding of what you're trying to do in your current post, and you're questioning yourself as a coachee, and the coach, and the benefits are just enormous. There's huge amount of learning, you're as in yourself, but huge amounts of discovery. And it's just having this critical friend, this support, this crutch alongside you. And you said at the beginning of this question about within the world of sport, we all have coaches. I'm of course I'd say this, but I wish I'd had a coach a long time ago. I've got 3 guys who I look up to who work. I'm very lucky. I'm going to name them. Owen is incredibly kind. He gives me about half an hour twice a year on the phone. And then the wonderful man called Darius gives me sort of a little bit more than that. and then Deborah Henderson gives me that, and they are essentially my coaches,
Yes.
coaches, and I've learned huge amounts from them, and I wouldn't be where I am without them. And obviously Charlie as well. Charlie does a great job.
Yes.
I'm doing my next level at this particular stage, the ACC on coaching.
Yeah.
It's just having, we have our friends, but actually having someone who's that little bit different, who's going to challenge you. And we'll talk about that, I think, in a second.
That is really, and I think just sort of drawing on that, your experience, I know from my experience, I had really struggled on self-reflection or even to accept support from others, because I saw that as a failure on my behalf, that I wasn't doing my job, or that you were finding fault. And then what happened to me was, when I did get, it was, a colleague alongside me at first, who I went out and we were being sent out to all parts of Australia. And I had to trust that person before. I think, and that was that kind of that switch that turned in me to go, oh, they're not out to trip me. They're not out to make me fall or, catch me out. They're genuinely here to help improve me. And that's something I think that is a mindset thing. We have to get into that. And then that, and exactly what you said, I wish we'd had that coach earlier. We've got people, we'll come to this question next about mentors, but we have all these people who, help tick us the boxes to get to where we need to be as graduate teachers or whatever. But the role of a coach is just something in a very different, unique way. And so that sort of leads us on to that kind of, we'll come to that in a bit. But the next question really is sort of looking at what an educational coach does. And we see some enormous claims on what things can offer if we look at these kind of professional programs that I see often coming up. And it can offer an enhancement of professional learning, but it can shift educational philosophies. It can improve student outcomes and create successful cultures. But these are pretty huge things. And if you and I have been in leadership, that takes some time, and will obviously take time to implement into schools. So where do you even start when you go and meet someone and go, this is what we're doing? Like, how do you even begin that process?
Hopefully with a lot of fun and honesty.
Oh, that's good.
And so the first you said lots of claims, do we unlocking potential and maximizing performance? That's what I would hope. And I would hope that would be the overall outcome. We're going to unlock your potential, what you can do, they're going to work alongside you, Anna, and we're also going to maximize your performance. And I think that would be the overall outcome. But the process would begin with just an initial conversation, half an hour. Do you know what coaching is? Do you know what it involves? Do you know what it isn't? What are you hoping to gain from this? They have a questionnaire that they do. They have two questionnaires, my guys, and thank you, Charlie, for the support with that. But they do these two questionnaires, and they can do it in as much or as little detail as they wish, or not even bother. Most of them do. One of them, one guy wrote me almost a dissertation in his. It was just total A star, and I read and went, my gosh, that's just unbelievable. And so it's all about trying to find out what they really want. What sort of topics are they wanting to, are they wanting to deal with? For example, they might not be very good on school strategy. They might not be so good on public speaking. They might not be clear on their own values. Because I bill myself as the values coach, because I'm a big believer in values and the importance of values. And it's amazing how many people don't know what their own values are. And we end up, it's the second session we tend to do on values, and have a lovely big normal discussion about what their values could be and why, and how they could help, and etc. And then their values become them. It's like the stick of rock, the wording in the rock, or their mantra, or their or their signpost that will allow them to make their decisions. And so that really helps. But we having done that, we then say it's a combination of individual bespoke sessions. So I do a session on, I say, look, I'm going to do a session on trust, I'm going to do a session on communication, I'm going to do a session on you might want to do obviously values, but it's led by them. And then there will also be moments when they come to me and they say, right, I want to do that, but today I've had an absolute nightmare. Can we just have you talk alongside me, and I talk to you about a particular issue I've got in school at the moment?
Yes.
one guy I'm working with at the moment, he's got some leadership issues, and he's just wanting to talk about that. And there are other times, as happened yesterday, with a wonderful guy I was working alongside, and he had said, "Can we talk about communication and strategies and you do within my school?" And he turned up at the session, and I just noticed he was really worried about this one particular person he was working alongside.
Yeah.
So I just said, "Why do we not do the community? Let's solve this problem.
Yes.
Let you solve this problem with me alongside you." And we did, and I know he's going to be flying because of that.
Yes.
Which is really exciting. So and it's I think the coach, my understanding when I was sort of doing my dissertation, the word coach, it's an old Hungarian word, and it's KOCS, and as in coach, and it actually is a physical coach that's drawn by horses. So that is the idea of the coach, that you're behind the person. You're not in front.
That's a great analogy, isn't it?
And so they're doing they're taking you, but you're just there helping and prompting, probing, asking the right questions. And apparently at Oxford Uni in the 1830s, coach was a slang word for the guy who worked like your tutor, who got you through your degree. There you go.
Oh, that could have come in quite handy. That's quite an interesting way you put that, because I think when you're in an environment, it's lovely to have that perspective from outside, because you'll know more than anyone that when you're in a leadership space as well, seeing the wood for the trees is a really difficult one, because you are having to keep this wood in place and make sure it's not whatever it is, and you're kind of keeping this fine tune, but actually pinpointing something and saying, let's focus on this, and then the pathway will open, is a lovely one to think about, and you just have to, I think that comes with a lot of intuition, and someone who can listen and someone who understands and then can hone in. You're right, when you're even saying about the body language, that is the really crucial part, and then that really explains just how important a coach is, and that as you're saying, the values and the kind of the skill sets that you need to have. And interestingly, talking about this, I was talking to a doctor recently, and it was the most interesting thing, because at one point he said, "I'm just going to have to admit to you, but this is beyond my skill set. And I know someone else who'll be better equipped to support you." And I remember just thinking, oh, wow, you're the top consultant here, and even you're saying, but it was just that openness, I think. And I think we it's the value we hold in our profession, that we are a master of all trades at many times, and having the support of a coach is invaluable. But I think what I've looked at, and it was kind of a bigger thing that I'm trying to understand, and I'm sure others will, the value of a coach versus mentor. And, I think when we look in a bit deeper depth, and I think you've really touched on it already, but a coach seems to be more goal orientated, more structured focus with kind of a pathway, more like project management. We're kind of getting this. What do you see are some of the key differences or similarities between the mentor versus the coach?
Well, it's interesting you said goal setting, because that's one of the topics that people always want to talk about. Of course they do. But my understanding of the mentor is very much in front of you. Yeah. And the mentor very much leads you, advises you, imparts wisdom. It's kind of like there's a great I hope it's not going to sound too pretentious, but I worked in Kenya a long time ago, and there was a wonderful Swahili word, which is mzee, which means like the wise one, the wise man of the village, or the wise woman, obviously, in our world. But that's my understanding of what the mentor is about. So the mentor is very much, so the wise person you go to, yes, very, very much. Yes, okay. Well, what would you do in this situation? And the mentor would go, well, my child, what I should do is this, and so it's very much telling, it's very much leading, it's very much being, in my day and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration. Whereas by contrast, the coach is very much supporting, is very much questioning, is very much working alongside, behind, and therefore, because of those prompts and those probes and asking the right questions, you as the coachee come up with your own solutions, sometimes my clients say to me, what do you want me to say? And I go, well, I don't want you to say anything. I want you to, know
Yeah,
the answer.
this is it.
It's
Yeah,
up,
exactly.
it's up to you.
And that's
And
very
the
much,
power of silence is amazing. And there's
the
great
two
moments
years.
when that's it. There's great moments in a session when you ask, and I still get a little sort of spring in my step.
Yeah.
I go, yes, good question, to myself. When I ask a question and the person just goes and pauses for 20, 30 seconds,
Yes.
and you just think that's real growth, that's growth because you're thinking as the coachee, whereas as a mentor, you're being told what to do.
And I'm just, when you're talking like that, especially with that beautiful analogy, when you're talking about, that wise old man. And often when we're talking about, I think when we look at education as a whole and we've, all the kind of conversation, but it is about changing that sage on the stage, this guide by the side. And that's what we want to do with our students. So there's nothing more important than embedding it ourselves and embracing it ourselves. So then we have that ability to become the coaches of our students, as opposed to we've got to fill your vessels with information, as opposed to having you really part of that process. So over here in Australia, we have a governing teaching body, which is called the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership, which is quite important. It's called AITSL, but it also has that school leadership. So it really sees the profession across the whole pathway. And it's good because it provides that set of standards that teachers must meet, and very clear pathways to how to progress their career and what kind of things they should be looking for. But with regards to coaching, they state that the role of the coach is really working to model and observe classroom practice and to support reflection and professional conversation, which we think is wonderful. But the aim is to build a partnership to develop evidence-based teaching practices. And we've touched on this quite a lot already in this conversation, but I am really interested in this part about building a partnership. You've talked a bit about belonging, we've talked about relationships, but what are your go-to tips to help form that partnership so that we guarantee the greatest success?
Gosh, that's a big question. And
good lead-up point, that one.
And I hope I'm going to answer it as you wish, but it is not as you wish, but as you intend. You talked about it a little bit when you were talking about the sage on the stage or whatever it is, but I think it is absolutely crucial. And I coach, half of the guys I'm working with are in education and half are in the real world, out of education in different trades, and whether it's in real estate or headhunting or whatever it is, when that's really, but everyone has, it is amazing, Anna, how everyone has got the same concerns, issues, and are looking for this, for the same problems. They're all wanting, they've got sort of maybe relationships that don't quite work in their school or their business or the organization, or they've got people who put blocks up. There's what is really interesting is the amount of places that talk about, whether it's schools, the ego, and if people just strip that all away and there was loads of trust, and it's just unbelievable what could be achieved. But it comes up in almost every conversation. But building that partnership, I think, me as the coach with the coachee, it's about having as much openness, trust, feeling that we're part of, that I'm part of their journey, and
the investment.
We have the sessions that we do. And I say we, it's not I, it's we. And the sessions that we do are between 60 and 90 minutes, tends to be every 2 weeks, because that allows learning to happen. And they buy blocks of 8 weeks, or 8 sessions or 12 sessions. And I caught, you referred to the Sherpa. That's the idea of the person who's doing the heavy lifting alongside. I'm not, hopefully there's no cultural inappropriation there, because Sherpas are I'm actually reading a wonderful book at the moment just called Sherpa, which is the history of Sherpas in the world. It's a beautiful book, beautiful people. And anyway, so the 8 sessions it's called the acclimatization, and then there's the 12, which is the long haul. But that's not what they don't just get that. we have I do lots of WhatsApps with them. I might send them. Yesterday, I sent all my clients their individual values via WhatsApp, and just because they need those little reminders of what they are, So there's one guy that's maybe struggling a little bit at the moment, and he just needed to be reminded that one of his values is joy, and he came back to me quite soon afterwards, just going, "Oh, love that. Thank you for the reminder." So it's trust, it's openship, relationship, bond, partnership, feeling that someone is, you've got a non-judgmental, highly confidential confidant who's always on your side.
Yes. What you've alluded to before is that longevity as well. You're talking about this, and yes, we've got time frames, but that longevity that, you're saying people still keep in contact with you as students, but you also hope that for that role, because you've really invested yourself as well into that school. What the environment is like. You've been part of that. You've been privy to some really beautiful moments that person's having, and be part of that success. I thought that was really powerful, because I know that myself, I remember being part of a fellowship, and we are still in a WhatsApp group, and we were from all over Australia. But it was one of those, like a security blanket. You can literally, it's like that lovely seal box. I go in, I can do my ranting, I can do my raving, but I could also be also that person to someone else who needs it. And we can have our little subgroups of different curriculum areas, whatever it would be. But even to this day, I would say we're regularly, probably at least once, twice a week, still involved with it, and just sending each other messages. And because it often will be working, a lot of people will be working in the media sky, or they're doing kind of what their achievements, and it's just that person. I think those people who are behind you, who've got your back, and that can be clouded in any kind of environment, doesn't it? Working environment, you kind of need that, as you're saying, that critical friend. So important, really important.
It is extraordinary how sport gets it so right. You look at particularly the athletes who've got their coach, and that's the helping them, supporting them, leading them, advising them, doing lots of a lot of it is really emotional, and a lot of it is people cry, and I sometimes do as well. Someone described something yesterday, and he sort of welled up, and so did I, because it was just such a beautiful moment in a school when he was telling us about he'd just someone appointed someone as the new head girl, and the way he told it was just like bottom lip wobbling all over the place. Right, come on, let's move on. It's sport. You look at all the Jess Ennises of the world, or the whoever they might be, with those amazing Daley Thompsons, those guys who were. Although I think Daley Thompson actually coached himself.
Very impressive.
But legend, local legend.
Coach. I think the coach in sport, and I think we've both probably been very, very lucky that in the environments we were in, you also had to be a coach. It was kind of a sporting coach. That was kind of what you had to do, and it was just part of the job. But my husband, I look at my husband. He's had a professional sporting career, and did a lot of coaching. And I look at other coaches, and we talk about it a lot. But some coaches go into the role picking their star players. I'm going to bring this person on, and this person's got potential. But then overall, that team does not succeed. Like you're seeing, yes, you might have some brilliant people, but have you created that culture? And then other staff, other coaches who literally have put everybody into that, and they know they're superstars, but they also know the value in that superstar being supported by the next person. And I think I see that as a greater, when you look at that, I look at some teams and I'm going, they've got that right. And you look at, those legendary sports coaches, and that's that very reason. They've understood their players, they've understood what they're aiming for, and do it as a collective together. So very important. Now, I can't believe we're actually.
And that's interesting. Sorry.
No, you go. Definitely.
But I think that's a really interesting analogy, because it's and Owen Eastwood talks about this big time in his book, but there's also just the moving on to the football coaches, because I'm a massive Brighton and Hove Albion fan, and I love our, whether it's Roberto De Zerbi or Fabian Hertzler, these are or even Potter, these guys, great managers, and they're all different. But I particularly love Thomas Frank, who's at Brentford, and Brentford, and what he does there he's so measured, and he just
Yes.
clearly gets his guys. And and the way, and you listen to the way he speaks and the way his team speaks, it's really, he gets the togetherness, he
Mm,
gets the belonging, he gets the, what we're trying to do here. It's not win at all costs.
yes.
It's about developing individuals for the collective good. And that's what you do as a coach.
Yeah.
I would love, we would love, our guys who are running the schools, or I work with a lot of deputies as
Yeah.
well, or or the guys in the real world, and you just want them to come and just to fly, and just to, as
Yeah.
you said, sort of working out potential and maximizing
Mm.
performance. And
And
that's the beautiful thing.
you're talking about that lovely, I'll specify for our Australian, that the soccer analogy that we have, but it's the Ted
Mm.
Lasso moment, and he's
Yeah,
got that
yeah,
following
yeah.
that was beautiful. And I think that's
Mm.
probably one of the best shows I've watched in a long time, just
Mm.
because of that value element.
Yeah.
And it's quite hyper. Those kind of ideas are really brought in a very obvious way to
Mm.
the audience. But I think that's a really powerful thing that people are seeing now today. And not to rub it in, but as a Newcastle United fan who's just recently
Oh
holding up
yeah.
some cups,
Eddie
very
Howe, great.
important for us.
What a great man.
I know.
What he does. Look what he did with
Yeah.
Joe Linton. I mean,
Yeah.
unbelievable. That was a guy who was a striker, and now he's this machine in the midfield. What an
Yeah.
athlete. And I, maybe I'm wrong, my limited knowledge of football, but gosh, that team with all those injuries to win
Yeah.
that trophy, it was unbelievable.
But it's another one of playing the long game. And I think we can have that analogy
Yeah.
in education. We can't, it was a very, very long game for Newcastle, but it was the idea that you build that team and you build that. And I think with coaching as well, especially in that, it's not about, as we're talking about that goal thing, it's not about achieving the goals within a year. And we see that a lot. I don't know if you've seen that in education, where principals or head teachers come in and they're so in that active space and it's so activated. And we've talked about this listening and observing, and it's that push to make the mark or show what to do. And it's kind of, you have to tone that back and have that critical friend who's saying to you, you don't need to run. Like, this is a long game. It's really important that you get those structures in place. So yeah, that's a lovely little segue there. But we're really near at the end, and I can't believe this because we could talk for hours. But it's been lovely because I've seen some of the press that's been around you, and we had that lovely one show moment where Jack Whitehall talked about, your wonderful influence that you had on him when he was at the school. And I think that is just so beautiful because he's quite over here in Australia, we're big Jack Whitehall fans. But
He's been on
it's
tour,
fabulous.
hasn't he?
he's wonderful. But
Yeah.
we look at that, but that must, for you to be that person to him, there must have been someone that you had. What teacher was you? Who was your favorite teacher who was able to give you that inspiration to go into the education sector and be that person for others?
It's such a brilliant question, and it's such a difficult question to ask because as soon as you ask it, one's sort of thinking, God, there's going to be all sorts of people who are going to be offended out
who weren't part of your team. Yeah.
And I think it would be a lovely question to actually stick out on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
because we, it's lovely of Jack to say that. He's got one, wonderful family, and they're just they were great because they've just been on tour in Australia.
Yes.
Hillary and Michael as well. It's just,
Yeah.
brilliant process,
Yes.
partnership, team, whatever. But I had my best teachers were at prep school, so up till I was age 13. And I wonder whether it was just because my parents were living in Spain, so maybe they were more formative, and they were more part of my life.
Yes.
These guys, because I was boarding and in a tiny little prep school up in Herefordshire. There was only about 100 of us, and a great head teacher.
Yes.
And I was just thinking quickly about this in terms of your answer. It's by pure coincidence, ABC. So there's three guys, but I'm going to highlight one particularly. So there was a guy called Clive Ashby.
Yeah.
Ashby, he was brilliant. He was an amazing maths and athletics teacher and coach. I was a reasonable runner when I was young. And then there was an amazing guy who I'm still in touch with called Boz. and he was again mad science teacher
Yes.
and great athletics coach. Loves his athletics. Still very much involved in athletics in the
Involved,
prep
yeah.
school world, even though he's nearly 70. But number
Yes.
one, I'm afraid, is Colin Stoop.
Yeah.
And I think if you asked a lot of the guys who are at the school, they would say the same. And interesting enough, Colin, really sad. I'm pretty certain he was when he was younger in a car crash, and his fiancée didn't survive.
Oh, wow.
And he was a bachelor, confirmed old bachelor, wonderful man who used to sit and it was the days when he could smoke gauloises, never in front of children. You'd see him reading his book in the
Yes.
rose garden at this beautiful, often playing his guitar. The children would come and out, we'd all know what he was doing.
Yeah.
And he was this incredible English and history teacher. And I became an English and history teacher.
Yeah.
And I just remember the stories he used to tell. And we read the books he used to read. I mean, we were reading, and that was, you look at English now and children now in terms of reading. And I used to do this as a teacher as well. I just say, right, I'm going to read to you for the whole lesson. And just the value of that, just to stop and do nothing. And Colin used to do this. And, even when we were during the, exam season, no, we're going to read. And we read things like, he read us, Lord of the Rings. He read us
Wow.
of Mice and Men. He read us Catch 22. He read us.
Yeah.
He read us. I mean, honestly, this great list of books for 12, 13-year-olds. And he also taught us current affairs and wrote me about me one of the greatest reports I ever got. And I love football then and still do now. But the report in my current affairs report just said this: he is still shocked by Brazil's World Cup defeat. And that was it. And I love that you could get away with a report like that. And that probably was, I was,
no,
exactly sad with that probably. But just say he had a real character, and he was just, and sadly he passed away, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And I didn't get the message, so I didn't get to the funeral.
Yes.
And I think the main thing is I never told him, have you told your best teacher? And that's perhaps the message I'm trying to get out here, is that you've lovely, Jack, thank you so much. That was so lovely. I didn't know that was coming, but I think I would love to have told Colin. And when I ask that question of other people, I say, have you told them? They go, no, you've got to tell them. You've got to tell them, because there's some wonderful people out there who are going out and who are really working hard for these guys, who are turning up. Oh, so I'm late, sir. Whatever. And you prepared this fun lesson today.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So
and
Colin
it's
Stoop,
interesting that
R.I.P.
And it's and I think it's that as a child, isn't it, that who's putting that effort in as well. You can sniff them out straight away, and you're right. Those people who really invested in you. And when you're young, you don't say the you say the perfunctory thank yous, but it's only on reflection. And I think as well as educators, we do that because we hold those values that those people instilled in us. And I think the way you've spoken about reading, because that's a very big conversation, I think, another podcast way, but we're having this constant struggle with what's the best in reading practice. And the idea which you're talking about, those books, and I'm sitting here at the time thinking, I remember when my teacher read this to me. I remember this book. I remember that, and I could list off all the books, because exactly that, those moments where you could just sit and, listen to somebody. And it was just, you were in a whole beautiful space. And we talk about this whole mindfulness for students and calming that kind of pressure down. And it's so valuable. And that's, remember, I took up when I was working up in the Pilbara here, which is quite a remote, it's remote, but it's quite a large area. But I used to open the doors in the morning and just read, so that when parents came in, and a lot of them had a traumatic background in education themselves. So it was very much a come in when you're ready, start the story. But I also at the end, and I hadn't realized at the time, the value in that some of those little siblings were having by coming in and sitting on the carpet with their children, because they were getting a story read to them. which you forget now because we're busy, and there's a lot of busy parents. And there's a great guy over here who's written a paper on the role of the parent in a school and the pressures that they're also trying to juggle. And I think incredibly so in the UK, when you've got such a fluctuating, kind of independent sector going at the moment. But it is that value of that reading opens that door and also opens that safe space. So yeah, that definitely had me thinking tonight and had those little goosebump moments of my wonderful moments.
Just another goosebump moment that might come back is that a question I think would be really interesting to ask teachers is, who's the greatest person you've ever worked alongside? As in the great, not maybe the greatest, your best mate or the greatest fun or the best on the the dragon pub crawl, but who is the greatest teacher? Just from that. And mine would be Ian Murchie. I'm so lucky. I work with so many amazing people, but Ian just takes it, I'm afraid. I'm sorry to disappoint other people, but his energy and the way that he would, I remember one day he spent 8 hours on the stage on his own blocking the dancing for that production he was doing. Where you going to, and I remember him coming back and he'd done it and literally but just his, he and there was a moment at the Dragon when he was told he had to stop teaching drama because of constraints on a timetable. And he was a great French teacher and a great English teacher and just a great man. But he just said, okay, well, what we're going to do is we've got 4 French lessons a week. One of them is going to be in drama. So we're going to do French, but dramatic. So, he taught them in the cafe, and they had to go and bonjour and all this stuff. And he got them to act, and it was just, and that, those sort of guys, genius guys, and lovely people. But I think that would be an interesting one, is to say who's your best colleague that you worked alongside, in terms of someone you just went, wow.
Yeah, and I think that also sits beautifully in the idea of the lifelong learner, that you're open to still learning from others. And because
absolutely.
I will hold my hand up and say, I came out of university, got my first job at the Dragon, and I knew it all because I'd done my degree. So therefore, I'm coming in, and I remember that wonderful feeling of being able to close the classroom door, and I was in E block, close that door, and these were my children, and I was going to impart my wisdom. And it's, with experience and with time, you realize that you couldn't do that on your own. It was about your colleagues and learning from them and observing from them and how they worked at situations, especially with things like behavior management, all those sorts of things. That comes with a real sense of trust and love and care from others. So yeah, that's a beautiful one. Well, we do have to finish there, Harry, although I'm sure we could go on for many longer. To our listeners here today, it has been such a wonderful time having Harry with us, and we're hoping that Harry may look to join us for some masterclasses along the way, looking at potentially how many people might want to go work overseas, and Harry's experience in that, and how we look at approaching school systems and curriculum systems and how to be there for the best success. But as you probably know, it has been a wonderful conversation, and we will pop into the links and share Harry's work so that you too can connect with Harry and see what relationship you can build and success in the future. So thank you all for listening today, and we look forward to chatting to you all again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.